The terms are mutually exclusive. They are diametrically opposed. To be a hypocrite and claim to be Christian should strike our ear like oxymoronic, right? Like an embezzling banker or a jumbo shrimp. Assuming oneself to be holier than the other, or signing on to a list of evangelical beliefs, or an Apostles' Creed, or a statement of moral markers, may give a public pretense of purity. It may give a socially expected kind of righteousness that you say, oh yes, I believe that. It demonstrates a public piety, but it does not make one pure at heart. It does not necessarily move us forward in our Jesus-designated role, which is to be peacemakers and love bringers and healers and helpers. Back in the days of JFK, how many? I'm old enough to remember that, so don't show your hands, but there's a number of us remember the days of JFK, when America's Russian nemesis at that time was not Vladimir Putin, but Nikita Khrushchev. He was that man who banged his shoe on the podium at the United Nations and said, "We will bury you." And he had the standoff with President Kennedy in the Cuban Missile Crisis more than 50 years ago. Remember? Nikita Khrushchev expressed his contempt for the Christian ideal of meekness or humility as he knew it was taught in our churches. This characteristic, in Khrushchev's opinion, is directly, and I quote, contrary to the instincts of natural man, who exalts the concept of strength, force, aggressiveness. In the real world of economic competitiveness and military power, meekness is equivalent to softness, lack of courage, and moral weakness. It was in direct contrast to Jesus' promise in today's reading, the promise that the meek shall inherit the earth, that the Russian leader declared to the United Nations that communism would bury us. No soft, submissive, morally weak ethic like humility would grant anybody title to the earth's real estate. No, that was going to be determined by military power and by missiles and by bold boasts of superiority. Now you're talking strength. The rising threat in those days of what was called godless communism, together with Darwin's assertion of natural selection and the survival of the fittest, sent America's leading politicians, diplomats, and military advisors into a Cold War. A lot of people began to believe what the Russian dictator believed, that humility is a weakness, a liability, a character flaw in a truly strong America First patriotism. My sermon title suggests that humility is actually a virtue. It's a strength of character. It's not a weakness. It's an indicator of a Jesus-like attitude in the midst of many competing emphases. To see humility as a virtue was controversial when Jesus first announced it. And it's still controversial today. More than 100 years ago, the German theologian, philosopher, Friedrich Nietzsche thought that humility should be seen as a vice, that it should be removed from the list of virtues. For in his opinion, which is shared by many in Western culture, a humble person is somebody who thinks of herself or himself as lowly, someone who leans towards self-abasement. Ludwig Jaskola, who's a postdoctoral fellow at the Munich School of Philosophy, in an article in last year's Process Studies Journal, defines humilitas as, and I will quote, someone who exemplifies realistic self-understanding, in the sense that she or he assesses correctly and truthfully the relations that are constitutive for her being the person she is. It's a kind of self-understanding in a way which limits its extent to direct, realistic evaluation of the risks and benefits of our situation and our different courses of action, unquote. That's a postdoctoral philosopher's way of saying what it means to be poor in spirit, to be humble, as well as to be meek or merciful, or some of the other characteristics that Jesus calls blessed. It does not mean becoming a doormat, or eating humble pie, or acting like that sniveling Uriah Heep, who refers to himself in one of Dickens' novels as a meek and humble man. Now, to be humble is to look at yourself realistically, without puffing yourself up with pride, ego, and arrogance, nor disregarding your shadow side, seeing yourself realistically. To be poor in spirit, to be humble, means looking at oneself realistically, much like we might be seen from God's all-embracing perspective, where God sees us and knows us, warts and all. In the commentary on this text in the Christian Century for this week, J. Scott Turner writes, and I quote, "Poverty of spirit, like any kind of poverty, is an unenviable but survivable state of being. It's blessed not because it's desirable, but because it is a state of potential, a prerequisite for appreciating a true richness of spirit and abundant life. People who have crawled back from the desperate poverty are usually incredibly grateful. Those who proclaim no need of God or some greater source of life, those who have been handed wealth or think that they have created it all by themselves, tend to be self-congratulatory, not grateful." Unquote. Jesus' praise for the meek as the ones who will inherit the earth was intended to counterbalance the dominant society's praise of the wealthy and the powerful and the strong and the proud. Just like I mentioned a moment ago, hypocrisy is the nemesis of being Christian, so too is holding far too high an opinion of oneself the opposite of what it means to be meek. To be humble means that we recognize our spiritual inabilities to pull ourselves up on our own by our bootstraps. And so we turn to one another. We turn to a higher power for aid. Jesus himself is said to have been meek and lowly in heart. And in Judaism, the same thing is said of Moses, man meek and lowly in heart. So apparently humility in the Bible demands a very strong character to pull it off. One who is unselfish, one who's able to place the well-being of others ahead of one's own. To be meek, to be humble, means you're prepared and willing to serve the common good, not just your own good, not just your turkey for Thanksgiving, but 17 turkeys for families who won't have a Thanksgiving without you. Looking out for the welfare of others, working toward the flourishing of all, not just your party. Those who are meek, like Jesus was, those who are open to leading by God's Spirit, like Moses was, will enjoy the blessings that make life on earth truly worthwhile. Such things as peace of mind, knowing you're doing a good thing, that you're doing the right thing for the right reasons at the right time, and you're making a difference. A good conscience, respect in the community, a good reputation, harmony in the home, all kinds of unexpected love poured out your way. And you say, I didn't deserve this. I'm just doing what's right. In my opinion, these are among the richest blessings that life has to offer. And they are the heritage of the meek among us, the merciful and the peacemakers among us. See, so it goes with all 8 of those blessings. The peacemakers are called the children of God. The pure in heart are the ones who see God. The merciful shall themselves receive mercy. To show compassion to a person who's made a mistake. To lend a helping hand to a neighbor in their time of need. To erase from our own hearts the resentments and bitternesses and desire for revenge toward people who have wronged us. All such things show us to be the kind of merciful Christian that God desires and Jesus has instructed. Those are the measures. Such character traits help the light of God's love shine through us just like the sunshine shines through the Good Shepherd window up front. What does the Lord require of you? Asked the prophet Micah. And the answer he gave was very clear. To do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. I believe that Jesus' 8 Beatitudes, his 8 reasons for being congratulated, are simply practical measures of how we can do that, how we can walk humbly with God. John Peterson, in his popular paraphrase of the Bible, a paraphrase called The Message, put the Beatitudes this way, and I find them right on. You're blessed when you're at the end of your rope, for where there is less of you, there is more of God and his rule. You're blessed when you feel that you've lost what's most dear to you, for only then can you be embraced by the one who is even more dear to you. You're blessed when you're content with just who you are, no more, no less. That's the moment you find yourselves proud owners of everything that can't be bought. You're blessed when you care. At the moment of being careful, you find yourself cared for. You're blessed when you get your inside world, your mind and your heart put right. Then you can see God in the outside world around you. You're blessed when you can show people how to cooperate instead of competing or fighting. That's when you discover who you really are and your place in God's family. May we find that place. May we show forth such character